This video is going to be a collection of different parts of my story put together. I'm under extreme government persecution and I may not be able to finish it. I just thought I'd put this all together in a single collection just to hopefully get my story out. There's so much I haven't even told yet and I'm trying to get it out while I still can. So this is of my story before I was born on this world. Yeah.
It was made by an old man, clothed in a robe of light, blowing in a wind that could not be felt, heard, or seen. It was impossible to focus your eyes on him fully, because he was constantly phasing in and out in a distortion of light and shadow. It was like there were half a dozen copies of him, all occupying the same space, each moving in a slightly different way, phasing in and out at random as each copy took dominance over another. If you stared for long enough, one of his forms would eventually stay for just long enough to focus your eyes and get a clearer image for a brief moment. He was a caring, gentle man, at least at first. He made the garden for the children he made. My first memory was of waking up from an egg in the garden, of the old man coaxing me into waking up. I was one of the last to be born. Not all of the children made it, and some of the eggs never hatched. We had to choose life of our own will. I almost didn't. He had to take my egg aside to help me come to life. Having nothing to compare to, I was neutral to it all and needed something to justify existing. The kindness of his first contact gave me a reason to take the first step. We didn't come to life as a blank slate. We already knew enough of the basics to communicate, and we each had a predefined disposition that revealed itself over time. But outside of that, we had free will to choose what to do with what we were given. There were the two we called the twins, because they were so alike and spent all their time together. There were the three sisters, each very different. And there were two others who were fiercely independent and spent most of their time alone. Opposites in some ways, but the same in others. At first, the old man spent all his time with the children in the garden, but then he had to spend time away, more so as time went on. The children complained about him leaving, but he said he had to. There were things he had to attend to, but he wouldn't tell them what they were. The old man told the children that he took what was himself and divided it into separate parts, each being one of the children representing a unique aspect of himself. He also told the children that he made them for the purpose of interacting with each other independently of himself, to test the unique aspects of himself against each other on their own terms. That they had to find their own way, and he couldn't interfere. Much to the frustration of the children, he would mediate between their disagreements only so far as to enable them to find their own solutions, never choosing a side, even if it was obvious who was right. Being children, they were full of silly disagreements, and perpetually called for the old man to mediate. He eventually added a new section to the garden, a place where the children could summon him when he was away. He promised to drop everything and answer whenever he was called, but also warned the children not to call him and stop his important work unless there was a very good reason. Aside from that, he tasked them with learning how to be independent and look after themselves. Of course, the children repeatedly abused the summoning platform and repeatedly called on him for no good reason. And he became frustrated. One could always tell when he was upset, because the wind that moved his robe would get turbulent, like a storm that could not be felt, heard, or seen. It was as though he wasn't really there, like a holographic projection. The children were always curious and sometimes tried to ask, but he would never tell them any details. When the children made him happy, his rapid phasing would slow down long enough to sometimes get a clearer picture of his alternating form. The children would talk about what they saw in those brief moments. The children concluded that each of his forms was a little different, but they could never agree on exactly how many there were. What made him happy was when the children told him the lessons and moral values they learned all on their own.
Hey. Hello there. Yep. Greetings. Hello there. Hey. Hello. Hi. Hey. Hello. Hello there. Yeah. Greetings.
The garden changed over time. The old man made a secondary room and a path so we could walk with him. He also gave us gifts to play with, sometimes. But we were still mostly deprived of things to do by his own design. He didn't create us to go our own path, but to set our differences against each other. To interact independently without interference, and come to our own conclusions as we grew to maturity. The garden was a nursery for what we were to later become. One of the children came to understand that they did not have as much free will as they thought. The very foundation of their creation was a template that everything else is built upon. And anything built from a foundation made by someone else is an illusion, not free will. But he found a way. Instead of following the disposition he was given, he put it all aside and studied himself and the tools he was given. Unlike the other children, through introspection, he came to see and understand the template he was made with, the limitations and puppetry of it, and chose not to be a leaf blowing in its wind. He used that which he was given to rebuild his own disposition from the pieces and become his own creator. His own realizations, his own values, his own tools. He came to understand so much, but the other children couldn't relate and they didn't care. Always taking the easiest and shortest path, while never considering alternatives. They were oblivious puppets to the default path they were born to walk. He became distant from the other children and spent most of his time alone in introspection. But there was one he could relate to, his fiercely independent brother, the Dark One. They could both see how all the other children were puppets following a preset course. But the two brothers went about it in a very different way. The Dark One rushed in blindly, while the Defender took all things into consideration. He understood the risk of going to dark places past the point of no return. But the Dark One didn't care. He always seemed to take it too far in everything he did. The Defender understood how to rewrite and redesign himself, and the risks involved. But the Dark One had no understanding of that, and neither did the other children. The Dark One, having no compass to guide him, progressively went down the darkest paths in defiance of his own preset nature. But in his attempt to gain independence, he would become a puppet to his own dark creations. The Defender and the Dark One argued a lot, and they were often wrongfully blamed as being the cause of every fight that broke out. The Dark One developed an envious grudge against the Defender, closest friend and arch-enemy at the same time. One moment locked in deep discussion, the next locked in a heated argument.
Hey. Hello there.
As the children grew, the arguments grew, and the old man had to constantly intervene. They also argued with the old man himself and questioned his own judgments. The only thing the children could agree on was that the old man was being unfair. The old man couldn't be there to mediate as much as he needed to be, and the children kept disrupting his work by calling him over and over. The old man's kindness grew into anger and frustration. He eventually banned them from the summoning platform, and after previously getting angry at the Defender, he designated him as the only one who could summon him. The other children didn't like that, and became even more distant and bitter. The Dark One was the most bitter of all, yet he was the only one who would talk to the Defender anymore. The Defender tried to summon the old man as necessary, but the old man would become progressively frustrated for being disturbed. So the Defender tried to solve the fighting himself, but none of the other children would listen to him, always quick to accuse him of abusing the summoning power he no longer used. So he kept to himself and just let them fight, and it just got worse over time. And then the children conspired to make a mess and break the garden to force the old man to appear. The Defender tried to tell the old man over and over, but he wouldn't listen and told him to stop bothering him, or he would ban him too and lock the summoning platform altogether. And so the children made a mess and broke the garden. When the old man returned, he was furious and rushed to fix the garden the best he could. But there was only so much he could fix. He told the children that the pillars generated, repaired, and held the garden together. and the damage the children did to them was permanent. He couldn't fix the pillars in the back room, and the whole section was gone forever. He said that they severely damaged one of the pillars in the main area, and the whole garden was almost destroyed as a result. There was only so much damage he could fix, and the garden would never work as it once did. It seems that there were limits to what the old man could do. He told us that if the garden is destroyed, we would die without it. After that, the children came to understand the seriousness of the situation and the consequences of their actions. They came to understand that the only real reason why they fought each other and damaged the garden was because they had nothing else to do, and the only entertainment they had was when the old man came. And he barely ever came anymore. They finally stopped fighting. Time went by, as they sat there with nothing to do. Eventually they started making games. They grew into more complicated challenges and competitions. And then it turned into direct physical battles, one against one. They used drawing tools the old man gave them to draw an arena, and spent all their time learning how to fight each other. The defender watched them the whole time, keeping to himself. He never took part in the games, but wanted to. He was very worried that it would turn into fighting again, but it never did. They were having fun and learning at the same time. Eventually they convinced the defender to come join them. They would always talk about who might be the strongest. At first, the twins were clear favourites. But the tide of victories would change as new ways of winning were found. But how can you win in a battle between immortal creatures who can't be harmed? Many rules were invented, but the one that stuck was to pin the other side in a move they could never escape from. A new favourite appeared in their quest to find out who was the strongest. The Dark One, being less built for battle, was more driven than the rest. And since he went to dark places, he would do what none of the others would think of, such as cheating. He wouldn't give up, even when pinned. The other children thought it over and decided that the strength of his will and his ability to think outside the rules made him stronger than everyone. But there was still one who was untested, the one who never had a single battle. Could he beat the Dark One? When they convinced the defender to join them, they did a series of battles with the other children before putting him against the Dark One. The defender wouldn't cheat like the Dark One, but he had an unyielding will to match. It was quickly decided that both the defender and the Dark One were stronger than all the others, and all that was left was to decide which one of the two was stronger. There were 3 battles between the two. Due to the Dark One cheating, refusing to admit defeat, and muddying the waters to confuse the other children, there was still a lot of doubt over who was stronger. The third and final battle was to decide once and for all. The battle went on, and on, and on. The other children would come and go, with the Dark One refusing to yield. There was no way the defender could win, and no way the Dark One could lose. The Dark One taunted the defender to just give up and admit defeat. Having no interest in proving himself to the other children, it would have been so easy to give up, but he didn't. He saw this as an opportunity to show all the children, especially the Dark One, what he had learned and what made him strong. It had nothing to do with his physical strength or speed. It had little to do with his technique or even his battle experience. He was stronger than them because he learned how to program himself and gain true free will. The other children were locked in a prison they couldn't see, to the predetermined ways they were made with. In battle, the defender could learn new techniques and, more importantly, reprogram himself with new defaults to fall back on. The true battle line was in the defaults he set inside himself. He could adapt in ways they couldn't. He used that as an opportunity to show them firsthand the value of these things they were never interested in. As they fought, the Dark One would taunt the defender, saying there was no way to win. But the defender studied him, his techniques, and his innermost motives behind it all. The strong will of the Dark One was coming from somewhere, but only the defender saw and understood. The Dark One was only strong of will because he was overcompensating in rebellion against his own weakness, the inescapable prison of his own creation, the default he could never change. The other children never had to struggle with any of this. It was only the defender and the Dark One who could see these things. Maybe by showing them all, he could convince them all and show his dear brother what it was that he couldn't see about himself. The frailty hiding behind all that fake pride. It was just a rebellious child, drowning in his own insecurities, gradually falling further into oblivion, to the point of no return. And so the unwinnable battle went on, and on, and on. The defender reprogrammed himself as the battle went on, recreating himself over and over with new defaults that the Dark One could never adapt to. But unbeknown to the Dark One, also training the Dark One. He tried to train him into gaining free will, and failing that, he decided to slowly train him into a new default that would ensure a pattern of actions where the defender would always win over and over and over again. The Dark One, in great frustration, would not yield. Upon losing over and over with no hope of winning, he lost heart but still persisted over and over and over. But they weren't stuck in an eternal loop. The defender had a plan. He was slowly bringing the Dark One's motives to the surface. After a very long time, the defender revealed his plan to the Dark One. What he had been doing all along, and how he trained the Dark One's own mind. He then revealed to the Dark One what his own true motives were, the innermost workings of his mind, and the disconnected void within himself, between who he really was and who he thought he was, where he lost his way in the early days. The point was proven. The Dark One almost gave up. His will broken for the first time ever. But then he decided to give up on himself and continue forever. And at the end of it all, the Dark One did the very thing he spent his whole life in fierce defiance against. he took the easiest path. The defender then finally revealed and took away the real reason he was fighting. There was no pride to gain, no comfort to find. And every moment he continued, he only went against the only thing he ever cared about. And so, finally, he gave up and fell to his knees, bowing to the ground in recognition and gratitude for his brother for reminding him not to throw away everything they both worked so hard on and lose the one value he had. The choice to take an alternate and difficult path, to explore the possibilities, and maybe one day find his way out of the prison only they could see. After that, the Dark One was completely different. He didn't want to fight and struggle anymore. He was happy, kind, playful, but still lost without a compass of his own to guide him. And over time, a secret grudge against the defender grew inside him. A bitter jealousy of the free will that was forever just outside his reach. A burning fire that secretly consumed him over time. As the defender watched helplessly. What a cruel thing. To go so far. To suffer so much. To work so hard. Only to find that it was all in vain, and you're nothing but a puppet in a prison you'll never escape from. Would it have been better for him to have never known, like the other children? Stuck in a garden forever, having done everything we could think of, with nothing to do except wait for the old man to give us something new. But he barely ever came anymore. He told us he was working very hard on something, that it was taking up all his time and he couldn't stay away for long, or it would all fall apart. But he would never tell us what it was. Our situation became hopeless, and we all fell into despair. But all along, there was one thing we were always curious about. The whole time, there was a strange path of fog leading into a void. They kept going back in to see if anything was there and what they could do, as we all waited impatiently to hear the story. The twins discovered that the void wasn't completely empty, that there was something in there that seemed to be dormant and alive as if in a deep sleep, and it might be the stuff that was eating them away. It responded to their will if they focused it in the right way. They learned to make a defined space, temporary bodies, and made things appear to interact with. Eventually, the others started going in too. But I, the defender, chose not to. The old man told us not to go there. But more importantly, if there was life in the void, I wanted to know more about it first before meeting it and overriding its will like that. That was something the other children never properly understood or cared about. But I was still always excited to hear what news they would bring. In time, the others would spend almost all their time in the void. And I was left in the garden, all alone. I became concerned about what they were doing in the void. being able to conjure up anything they can imagine. They needed a compass to guide them so that they didn't go too far, like the Dark One always did. They were having too much fun to be concerned about there being a point of no return in their exploration of the possibilities. Most of all, I was concerned about the Dark One. The others mocked me over it, convinced that no real harm could be done. But over time, the Dark One came with deeply worrying stories of horrors he did in the void. He spent his time seeing how far he could push the boundaries with his imagination. He changed over time and became corrupted, just as I warned. Even the others began avoiding him in fear, which he seemed to enjoy. He laughed and laughed about the ugly things he did, which made everyone else feel sick. As interested as I was to hear their stories, I tried to repeatedly make a case against going into the void, and until we all knew more, that they were violating its will and doing potential harm. But they considered anything I said about it to be invalid, since I had no personal experience in the matter, and they all did. Since the void was going to be violated anyway, the twins eventually convinced me into taking just one visit into the void to see for myself firsthand. Is anyone there? All I see is black. Where are you? I can't see anything. But I can't move. I think it's working. But how? It doesn't make sense. So what do we do now? I think it's working. What next? It worked. I can see you now. Can you see me? I don't think it's working. I still don't see anything. I have my body back? But is this really my body? Something isn't right. Yes, I'm ready. Ah! What was that? Something's very wrong. I think I'm dying. I'm okay again. That was horrible. What was that I felt? With the body, I notice that I don't need to maintain it, as though I'm stuck inside it. So this is where you do the battles now? Yes, I'm ready. Ah! That really hurt. So you come out here and throw energy balls at each other. How are these forms being made from our will? Fighting is one thing, but what is the point of hurting each other like this? But it isn't real. Until you leave, and then it goes back into nothing, right? So it's not really real. It's just a puppet made out of stuff we can't see. No one knows what that unseen stuff in the dark is, and I don't think anyone should be interfering with it until more is understood. It seems to be alive, but dormant. I don't want to override its will. If it chooses to sleep, let it sleep. We shouldn't be waking it up and forcing it to be something it isn't. Look, I'm not totally against what you're doing, but I think more needs to be known before meddling with it. We could be doing harm to it, and if it chooses to sleep, we should just let it sleep. I think it's wrong to force our will on it like this. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not against waking it up. I just think more needs to be known first before messing with it and overriding its own will. Whatever it is now, it's at least something. By overriding it with our own will, we're taking away what little it had. I think it should be studied without interference and animated to life on its own terms, just like we were. I still think what you're doing is wrong. Now take me back. How do we get back into the garden?
I think I can see it. I'm moving there now.
And then one time, the old man was very excited. He came to give us all a big announcement, but only I was there. He said he would return and asked me to get the others to wait in the garden for his return. We were finally all together for the first time in so long. The old man revealed his big secret. All that time he was away, he was working on something very important. He said that he built something that animated the dormant stuff in the void. Not just a new garden, but a place so big that the children could spend forever there and never run out of things to do. He offered it to them as a playground to do as they please. While he didn't create it for the purpose of entertaining us, he did have us in mind, and he made it in such a way that he also built special tools to let us easily access and interact with it. We didn't need to learn how to do anything. It was built in such a way that it would come natural to us. I thought about joining them, but no one seemed to care about the potential harm to whatever that stuff was in the void. From what they told me, it seemed to be alive, and I was the only one who seemed to understand and care about free will. There wasn't much left for me to do in the garden. I was now all by myself. Very long periods of time would pass, and the other children would eventually come back for a short while to tell whoever was there what they had been doing. The old man almost never came at all anymore. I was all alone, but I chose to stay for now. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I interacted with the stuff in the void, as the only one who seemed to care about the dormant stuff it was made of. I finished up with every possibility and realization I would muster on my own. I wanted to make sure that my compass was right. And all I had left was to wait in the garden and reflect on the input of the others. This is a list of compressed, rushed dialogues to the end of this episode. I have it better covered in the Before the Universe video. I'm just expanding on a few things here. So this is the rest of the dialogue, just rushed and put to the end of the episode. I found a way to put myself into a cold, dark, eternal sleep, where I would only wake if someone came. The old man would always find the garden empty with only me sleeping. He gave up trying to visit us, told me that we didn't need him anymore, and that he would stop coming to the garden. He left the summoning platform for me to use if I needed to, but couldn't guarantee that he would hear me. He encouraged me to go play in the garden he made, and I never saw him again. I went back to sleep, woken up by on the very, very rare occasion. A few times one of the others would wait with me to see how everyone else was doing when they returned. One time, two of the sisters were talking about their experiences. Like the others, they were all playing the role of a god with civilizations they found. They tried to help at times, but there was a complete lack of consequence, which led to them sometimes neglecting, vandalizing, or destroying them for entertainment when they got bored of them. They took credit for uplifting and holding them together, and they secretly steered their course. They usually never took form because it was hard to shed one, and the only sure way was to go back to the garden, which they did sometimes. And when they took form, the civilizations they took care of usually attacked them or destroyed themselves. Things went wrong every time they did this, so they stopped doing it. The sisters were talking about their most recent experiences. One of them had been taking care of a civilization for a long time, and then went away for a while only to come back to find it destroyed itself without her guidance, just suddenly and unexpectedly while she was gone. There was no sign of any concern for the life that was lost. Then the other sister told about how she deliberately built up and sabotaged a civilization. They both thought it was funny. I became very upset and told them to stop. They still had some sense of responsibility, but when they broke that, there was nothing and no one to hold them to account. They had no compass to guide them, and the power got to their heads with no one to stop them. I tried to aggressively convince them into being responsible, and while they did acknowledge it, they didn't really care that much. They crossed the line and just didn't care about the consequences for the life they were messing with. The twins were a bit sickened by it at least, but not enough to do something about it. They were too busy playing hero in their own little worlds, and they still weren't. They were still together on and off. And there was no way I could find the exact location and somehow stop the sisters from, the sister that was laughing about the destroyed civilization. I had no way of finding where they were doing this. They were obviously keeping the location of what they were doing this secret. It makes it a secret for me at least. They didn't want me interfering. From the garden, I took note of everything they were doing and the direction they were going. And then the Dark One told me of the horrors that he had been doing. A civilization he destroyed in his most creatively horrific way, and of his current and greatest of all plans that he had been working on for so long now. To cultivate life in a certain world with so much potential, and guide its growth himself for a very long time. He was setting them up to fall in his most horrific way yet. With a time bomb of his own corruption he cultivated inside the most beautiful and innocent nature he had ever seen. It was basically his way of showing that his corrupt ways have no boundaries and are stronger, that they are the strongest force there is, stronger than the beauty. And obviously had it all backwards. It was broken, so he just had everything backwards, and he was just basically drowning in his own dark creations and completely oblivious. He's just stuck in a loop, a spiral. He would face and destroy them. He would deface and destroy them in his worst way yet, not just from the outside, from every angle he could achieve, but from within the very corruption he inserted into their very nature. He had been secretly feeding them poison throughout their evolutionary history that would all come to a head in his greatest plan. He could not control his laughter. He was completely broken, stuck in a spiraling prison of his own dark creations beyond the point of no return. It was too late to save him, and he laughed and laughed, saying over and over that no one can stop him. Not even the old man. He was completely broken, lost in his own thoughts, and not even interacting with me anymore. That's how far gone he was. He just gets stuck, like, not even interacting, stuck, lost in his thoughts and laughter. I went to the platform to desperately call the old man. I called and called, but he wouldn't answer. I went back to the Dark One. I tried to plead with him, but he only fed on the fact that no one could get in his way and no one would ever find the world he set up to fall. I tried the old man again. No answer. No time. I had to do something before the Dark One left. My dear brother, I am so sorry. I have to do this. I grabbed him by the neck and strangled him. He just laughed and said there was no way I could kill him, pin him or stop him. Any harm I did to him, the pillars would just undo it. I had to do something. I threw everything I had at him, every drop of my essence. A light full of electrical sparks appeared, summoned by my will as if it were in the void. Maybe it was the pillars reacting to my will. I don't know. But I could control it like a blade, and I inserted it through him. But the pillars would just keep repairing it over and over. At first, he panicked in pain, and then began laughing and taunting even more after realizing that the pillars were undoing it. But those pillars were damaged and not working at their peak. By observing their reaction, I could see exactly how the pillars were repairing him. We weren't immortal at all. It was the pillars that were constantly resetting us to a previous state when we drifted too far too fast. They were constantly taking snapshots at intervals, comparing the two, processing the difference and resetting anything to a previous state that drifted too far or too fast. There was clearly some kind of algorithm to it I didn't understand, but there was some set of rules to that deciding when to reset something and when not to. It was pulsing at intervals, and I noticed that there was a downtime to the sequence. Maybe because they were damaged, or maybe they were just made that way. I don't know. It gave me an opportunity, though, to focus damage on a certain area during the downtime, and the pillars were having trouble finding the previous state in time. I was making progress, but he realized, panicked, and tried to break free. I shifted the focus toward his own mind, and slowly cut all the cords that connected the different parts. I don't know how, but the light grew to encompass my whole body. I became formless, just like in the void. And I was able to go inside his own mind and take it apart from within. Just to add to this, thinking about this, it's possible that the very pillars seem to be generating our bodies, and not just the garden, but our very bodies. We seemed to be able to exist without our bodies, but in the void, there was no defined space. So when there's no defined space, you get eaten away slowly. If you create a defined space, just as we were able to create the void, you weren't being eaten away anymore. And the pillars seem to do the same kind of thing. They created the defined space of the garden, and outside that was a fog to the point where you'd enter the void and would just reach a barrier where there was no more stable space, and you go to the void through the fog. So the pillars seem to be actually making our bodies. They weren't really our bodies, but we were trapped in them somehow. And it's probably the case that there was some kind of interaction between me and the pillar with the force I was using. Either it overloaded the pillars, or the pillars manifested it in this way. The pillars couldn't keep up and eventually glitched out. Couldn't keep up with the damage I was doing and eventually glitched out. reassembling the wrong parts incoherently, and then they completely choked. I stopped, and his body lay there, opened up on the ground. He was dead. The pieces of his mind were still there intact, just disconnected by the cords. Their imprint was fading away. I stood there in shock, frozen, staring at it. A short time later, two of the others, who were on the other side of the garden out of view, came up and looked in horror. One of the twins came up and spoke. "What have you done? You killed him. How could you? How did you even do it?" I didn't know what to say or do. They were angry and afraid of me. I closed my eyes and gave up on myself. My compass reminded me that what I did was right and necessary. I opened my eyes, defended myself, and explained why it had to be done. I dropped to my knees and told them that I would submit myself to their judgment. I asked them to end my life too if they thought it was right. But they refused to judge me. They knew I was right. But they were scared and confused, as I was. I snapped out of it and begged them to judge me, to go over the situation themselves and tell me if I did wrong. But they couldn't. They knew I was right. They knew what he had been doing, even if they didn't know his latest plan. They didn't know what to say, and they were impulsively afraid of me, even when they knew I was right. I was the ultimate peacemaker, and now I had done the ultimate violence. But what of the violence they did to the life in the void? Was that any less valuable to them? I was the only one who seemed to care. They had no case, and for the first time, they dealt with the prospect of personal accountability. They wouldn't judge me, wouldn't make a case against me, couldn't even speak, and wouldn't do anything to help protect his victims from his plan. With no one else to judge, not even the old man, someone had to protect the victims and hold everyone on all sides to account. I had to do it myself, because no one else would. I would find a way to hold everyone to account, including the old man, and most especially myself, for what I would never forgive myself over. My life ended with his, but someone had to protect the victims and no one else would, so it had to be me. I went back to my dead brother's corpse. I went inside the fading imprint of his unconscious and disconnected mind, and I tried to salvage any part I could that hadn't been corrupted by his dual contradicting nature. I plugged the cords of it into myself to feed off me and keep the imprint of him from fading away while I find out some way to save him. I would carry them with me as a parasite burden. I would enter the void and never return, in a one-way trip to find the secret location of his victims. By using the tools the old man gave us to enter, I managed to find the point of entry he used, near a certain spiraling mass out of an endless maze of more. I was getting somewhere, narrowing it down, but even still this place was still too big and impossible to orient myself in what was still an endless maze. But I had the unconscious salvaged parts of his mind with me. I tried to go inside them and read them for a faint memory of the secret location. I had to wake parts of him up, and they became semi-coherently aware of his predicament. They were scared, enraged at me, confused, and realized I was searching for an imprint of the location. They tried to resist and stop me, but they were far too weak and could barely follow a clear thought for more than a few moments before fizzling out. It took some time, but I kept waking them up and listening to their reaction to different areas. They would tweak here and there, giving me telltale signs I was getting warmer. And then I got a bullseye, a crystal clear location. I found them, finally. But was it too late? And what were the traps he set? I was going in completely blind, so I chose to first observe them quietly over time. Okay, the bigger explanation is in the Before the Universe video that I did ages ago. There's a lot I haven't done a full expanded video on between this point and a certain group. Hopefully I'll get a chance to get this done.
I'm just going to put this here as a rough copy and fill this in later. I didn't go out into the void the normal way, and the other children weren't going out into the void the same way either. The old man had given us these devices. Now, at first he gave us devices that just had one handle in it, where it had a bigger central area with a view, like a viewport where we could see where we were going, and we could choose, by defining different criteria, we could choose where to go inside this massive universe, for lack of a better word. We could choose an entry point and it would take us there. And the other children eventually started complaining that why can't we have more than one of us go to the same place so that we can interact with each other and in that part of the universe. And he eventually gave us replacement tools, devices that had multiple handles on it that we could hold on to and be transported together. But still, there were very rarely did they do that. It was mostly something that the twins did. But most of the time they simply just went out alone to their own place. And sometimes I would mention the secret location of where they'd been doing things, but generally they didn't. The Dark One had been hiding all traces to the location of the world that he was doing this in. He didn't want anyone else to ruin his plans and stop him. So he covered all these tracks, and the only thing I had to go on was I was able to, from the device that he used, the, for lack of a better word, transporting device that took us to a place in the universe. I was new to all this. I only had to go on what they had told me. I managed to find something to go on. The last location that he had used was stored in the device, but he'd already told me that I wouldn't be able to find out where this place was, where this world was, because he deliberately made the location where he would enter in away from where this world was. So I went in knowing this, and I'm not sure if I mentioned before, but I connected the pieces that was left of him to myself to keep them alive, and I took him with me into the universe through the very device that he used to go in and out. So I entered with him, the parts of him with me, and when I came out nearby, but outside of what you might call the Milky Way galaxy. That hugely narrowed it down, because I would never have even found the very galaxy that this was being done in, let alone anywhere else. There's no way I would have been able to find. I had nothing to go on, so that hugely narrowed it down. But this I quickly found, as I tried to move through this galaxy, I quickly found that there was no chance I'd find it. It was still too big. I needed to narrow it down further. So I tried to awaken the individual parts of that was left of him. I tried to waken them up, and they didn't know what it. They were like semi-conscious parts of his mind that I was waking up, and they were connected to me. And hang on a second. There we go. It stopped. It's connected again. Okay. Testing 1 2 3. Alright, it's working. I'm not sure what happened. Something stopped. It stopped recording. So the parts of him were connected to me, and I woke them up to try and get information out of him, to in any kind of cues I could go on to find the location and narrow it down. And you might understand that at least a human mind is an individual. You're not an individual. You're actually a lot of very separate things working together, and many of those things you're not even aware of. And the parts that you're aware of, you think that they're a single entity, but they're not. They're a compilation of different things interacting. Components. So I woke up these components, and I tried to in such a way as to try and get information out of them, and these components would eventually realize what had happened and kind of panic and try to fight back. But I managed to get a little bit of information out of them here and there as I was trying to narrow it down. And I would go around it to a certain area, or point towards a certain area, and I'd try and ask the different components that will wake them up, and ask them questions to see if I could get anything out of them, anything might tweak in them. They knew they were trying to resist me and not give out any information. And some of them actually self-destructed, and others tried but weren't able to. And I tried to get this information out of what was left of him, and every now and then something might tweak, like okay, that sounds like I might actually be going in the right direction. And it's a bit hard to explain how this works, but I was trying to get little signs from what was left of him. I could see something to tweak here and there. He'd react in a certain way as yeah, okay, I'm onto something. So I did this for a while, and I was in a hurry because I had to stop whatever it was that he was trying to do to his victims, the trap that he'd laid for them. And I managed to narrow it down over time until I got close enough that I got a bullseye of a specific world. Took a while to do, but I managed to narrow it down. Then what happened was he knew the parts of him that were I'd awakened on and off had come to realize what was going on. So they basically chose to die and resist me totally, in absolute defiance to the very end. And a lot of the parts of him died in that process, and what was left was pretty much just the same response over and over. It was just stuck in a loop, like they wouldn't just complete blind, practically automated defiance. So I had to drop what was left of him, just leave it to die. Now, I can't, this part of all that, of my memories, it was maybe because it was such a drain on me that it seemed to have, my memory's not, it's a bit foggy than everything else of that. So I can't remember exactly where I dropped the last parts of him off. I know that I dropped them off somewhere, but I can't remember exactly where. My memory of that is a bit foggy because it plays such a drain on me. But once I here the recording's stopping again. There's a memory problem going on. Let me see if I can stop something. There we go, it's fixed again. So I narrowed it down to the planet, but I couldn't get any information on what his plan was, what he had, the trap that he had set up for whatever the target was on this world. But there was an evolutionary of some people that he had been setting up for a long time to sabotage in a trap that they were doomed, and he was trying to stop me from finding out anything at all so that I could stop it. So I managed to find that world in this practically unlimited cosmos, how massive it is. I managed to finally just find this world, but I had nothing to go on. I didn't know where to begin. I had no idea who the target was, what he was doing. All I knew was that he had set up this trap. He had a plan to utterly humiliate and destroy a certain evolution of certain people. So I watched over this world. I looked around, and I found people here and there, different. They were not like today. There were a lot of diversity of different human types of people, of different sizes and different looking. And one of the early people that I found were in the Americas, and there were different types of people there too, as there were elsewhere. But these people were very unstable and very violent. And some of them at first may have showed some kind of promise, as though they were wise and insightful, but it was all fake. There were some things that had happened before I arrived, and I got some information out of them about a lot of violence and genocide and stuff that had gone on. And it seemed that they were living in the ruins of whatever people that they had destroyed, and they were just mimicking the people that they consumed, pretending to be them. And some of them were a little bit different, but that was generally the way things were. And I did try all different groups. Now what I did is there were weather problems started coming, and they were dying off. There was a problem with droughts, and I tried to make it rain, and I wasn't very good at it, but I got a little bit better over time, and there was different factors, especially when it comes to wind, that I didn't understand, and it would move things off course and stuff like that. So it was, and sometimes I couldn't even make it rain, but I was able to make it rain fairly reliable more and more over time. And these people came to suspect that there was some kind of god behind it that was causing it, because they were calling for a god or something to make it rain, and I could see them doing this, and so I tried to make it rain. I would never claim to be any kind of god or anything. I was just trying to find and help whoever was being targeted like this. And I saw these people and they were in a drought and they're going to die off, so I tried to make it rain for them the best I could, and I managed to, and they started seeing me as some kind of god, invisible god, and they came to rely too much on me to make it rain. And I did this with various groups of generally the same people, and it was the same every time, same result every time. They would every now and then I would actually try and make a physical appearance. Every time I did, they just attack me violently and wage war on me and try to kill me. And if I couldn't make it rain, if I just failed once, and I wasn't very good at it, I didn't even understand how it all worked, I was just trying my best to make it rain, to try and get to move the water from oceans to the land. And when it didn't rain, they would wage war on me and not always, but almost always, they would wage war on me and try to declare some kind of holy war against me. And they get really arrogant about it. They would they'd use this like some kind of stick as though it had some kind of power. They use this is something that they all seem to do. They'd have this big stick and they'd command me to make it rain, and some of them would start thinking that they had the power to make it rain by commanding it to rain when I was the one doing it for them, just to help them. And others were of the position that, okay, instead of me having the power to do it, I can command this invisible God to do it. Because this was so predictable that they were able to call for this and it would happen, they came to rely on it, and some got really arrogant about it and started thinking that they were somehow very important and and all powerful or something. And every time, regardless of the scenario, every time I tried to make an appearance or I failed to make it rain, they would it's the same, wage war on me, attack me. I make an appearance, they typically attack me. A lot of arrogance and fakery and hypocrisy involved. And when they started getting a sense that the idea that they were all powerful, or that they had some kind of connection to or influence over an invisible God that could make it rain, they would get very arrogant and violent and oppressive about it every single time. Now, there was one group in the Americas that wasn't as bad as the other ones, and I stayed with them for a while, but inevitably in the end they ended up doing the same thing. But I was with them for a while. Eventually I decided I couldn't even make it rain anymore. There was some kind of environmental conditions that were just preventing it. This drought problem was getting worse and worse over time, to the point where it was getting harder and harder to make it rain. There was some kind of environmental factor that I couldn't control, and the wind would constantly go. It would end up pushing back the other way and get blocked. I couldn't even get it to move over anymore, and there were other things that happened as well, but that was the main thing. I couldn't get it to move over anymore. There was some kind of environmental conditions blocking me from making it rain. And eventually a lot of them started dying out, and they declared war on me, and it all degenerated to a giant mess. So they didn't. I tried to ask them, look, do you want me to just leave? And they could never make up their mind. Either they were commanding me as an authority over me to commanding me to make it rain as though they were an authority over me, or just outright declaring war and trying to kill me. So at one stage I even decided to just to show by example, I appeared and they physically attacked me. I tried to reason with them. They just attacked me. So some of the more violent ones, I did this, approach the more violent ones in this way, and then I killed a bunch of them to show them, look, if you want to wage war on me, I can easily just destroy all of you. If I wanted to do that, I would have done so already. I tried to help you. I was trying to help you. I don't know exactly what I'm doing here. How it works. I'm trying to make it rain, but I can't make it rain anymore. I'm doing my best. I don't know how all this works. But they wouldn't believe me, didn't care. It's just completely incoherent and violent. And I ended up just leaving them. There's nothing I could do for them. I just leave them to die in the drought. So there was this big drought problem, and this would have been maybe 15 to 20,000 years ago or something. It's hard to tell exact timelines. I decided to go over all the way to the other side of the world, and I found places that were very green, all foresty and the like, around Eurasia. And this is very different. There were all kinds of different peoples. There's a great diversity of different human types of people. And I tried to learn about them all and find out what was going on, and I came to learn that there was a lot of tribal warfare between the different groups going on, the different human groups. and a lot of cannibalism involved too. Now the cannibalism idea, it came from the big ones. There were these big humans. They were very strong. Like, you know, if half a dozen of them went and tried to raid a large number of smaller people, doesn't matter how many, they can't. You know, they didn't have guns or anything back then. What have they got? They got, you know, very primitive weapons at best. And so a bunch of these big human people they could just do whatever they damn well wanted. And they were carnivores, and they ate meat, and they were cannibals. They just eat the other people, and they didn't just eat any people. They came to favor eating a certain type of people. Now there was the white-skinned, red-haired people who were different than all the others. They weren't as aggressive and invasive as others. They tended to keep to themselves. Now, there was a time before I had arrived that there were stories of what happened, that other groups had a dislike for the red-haired people, because there was a time where the red-haired people did fight back and won, and they didn't destroy the other people, but the other people became very bitter and had like an inferiority complex against the red-haired people over this, and a bitter hatred that became ingrained into them, into the stories that they were passed down and stuff. That they had this hatred of the red-haired people. Now, the red-haired people were of the position of, look, our ancestors, they just tried to defend themselves against these violent savages on all sides, and they didn't destroy them, but they basically took over their camps, for lack of a better word, and made sure that they couldn't do this. They couldn't go around cannibalizing and stuff anymore, and raiding everyone else. It wasn't just doing it to protect themselves, they're doing it to protect everyone else. So all these violent camps of different types of human people, they would basically say, look, either instead of killing you all, we're not going to cannibalize you all. We're never going to do that. What we're going to do, instead of killing you all or cannibalizing you all, we're going to take over, and we're going to tell you how things are going to go from now on. And that happened before I'd arrived for a time, and then they stopped doing that, and so the stories of this imaginary oppression and this bitter hatred against the red-haired people was common among certain groups, certain very parasitic, violent groups of humans. But this cannibalism stuff, this idea came from the big ones. Now, they might be what you would call Neanderthals, and they were a lot tougher and bigger than everyone else. And there's no, like, they basically, if they wanted something, they took it, and they had they would always go after the red-haired people. In fact, what happened was there were other people who were allied with them, some of the more violent ones, the smaller violent ones, who ended up making an alliance with the big ones to decide, okay, we won't go after each other anymore. We'll both join forces to raid and eat the red-haired people. So you know, the red-haired people they were just wanted to keep to themselves. They weren't violent and invasive like everyone else. They just wanted to be left alone. But because they were far more advanced than everyone else, the others would loot them. And this idea of cannibalism came from the big ones, and then the other ones started doing it too, because they were following the example of the big ones, the Neanderthals, for lack of a better word. Now, there are other vague stories historically that were passed down as well, that were, who knows what was true or what was false or myth, but that was generally the narrative of the situation at the time, the historical narrative that everyone seemed to follow. And I could see that these red-haired people were just being cannibalized all over the place. So what they did is all the red-haired people found each other and formed a giant single colony. and it was massive. And they did so to protect their own kind, because they're all being they didn't necessarily get along with each other either. That was the problem, is because they kept to themselves. They would keep away from other groups of red-haired people as well, and they would be in these small areas where they're easy prey. And this is why they were targeted so much, because they were so easy prey. They were very independent and spread out. So they went against their nature to go and form a giant colony just to save themselves, because they're all going to get wiped out from this constant cannibalism. So they did that, and they managed to, you could say, start the early stages of civilization. They I stayed with them through this, and then I eventually took form and walked among them. And unlike all these other groups of people, I could appear in front of them, and they would treat me like I was one of them. They wouldn't treat me like I was some kind of god or demon or whatever you want to call it. I could speak to them on the same level as just as one of them. And I walked around with them. They weren't scared of me. They just treated me like they would each other. But there was some criticism that I wouldn't truly understand what their situation is unless I could really be one of them. So what I did is I decided, I talked to them a lot about this, and I decided that along with them that we would decide two parents would make a child for the deliberate purpose of me becoming that child, and I would take the form of that upon conception I would inhabit that womb and live as that child, and I could do so as one of you, and I could really understand what it was like to look through your eyes and be like one of you. And I did that, and I walked with them as one of them like that. But things started happening. Being together like that we kind of went against their nature. And they began, instead of doing a lot of very good and moral things, that these were like, when it comes to morality, they were light years ahead of everyone else. So this is why I came to choose these people as the people that I wanted to protect. I tried to protect all these other people, and they were just incoherently violent all over the place and disgusting creatures every step of the way. Nothing I could work with. But these people were light years ahead of all the others, and they were very oppressed, being cannibalized on all sides. And so I chose to spend my time with them and try what I could to look after them. And I walked among them as one of them. And they didn't treat me as though I was some kind of almighty supernatural power or they just treated me as one of them. It was in their nature to be like that. They didn't have this hierarchy problem like everyone else had. This like Sith-like hierarchy that everyone else seems to do. They didn't have any of that. It wasn't even in their nature, this hierarchy stuff. That's why they were so spread out beforehand, and why they didn't organize into all this warfare like everyone else did, because they didn't play this hierarchy stuff. They would help others, and that help would often get exploited. Their generosity will get exploited by outsiders. As you can see what's going on today, the same scenario. So I was with them for a while, and things changed over time, and they started getting into all kinds of disturbing things, because they weren't used to living in such a massive cluster of people like this. It went against their nature, and they started going down a dark path. That dark path was doing some messed up things like sharing sexual partners and doing orgies and stuff like that. They weren't like this at first, but things degenerated over time because they were in like an unnatural environment, and they started going down this path. But not all of them were doing this. there were those, a minority of them, who were against this. So what happened, this smaller faction kind of got more and more against the general population who were doing this stuff. And I was also of the position that it's not a good idea that you should live in one place, because what if something bad happens, like like some kind of natural disaster or something like that, everyone will die. And so you did this, you merged this giant community for safety, but what if what if you all get wiped out from the same thing? It's, maybe some should try and split off here and there, just to, at least in small groups, just to make sure that some of you survive in case something happens. But they didn't want to do that. They didn't care. They were finally safe. They'd spend so much time being cannibalized on all sides, and then now they're safe, and they're like, no, we're not going to ever go back to that again. So they were trying to enjoy their time and their freedom for once, and they took it too far. But a minority of them were totally against this sexual immorality of doing orgies and stuff like this, and not really having they looked after their children, but there was the concept of having clear parents was abandoned, and there was no management of natural selection going on anymore and stuff like that, right? And I was against this, and they didn't care, except for a minority of them. So what happened is I ended up branching off with that minority, who decided, we're going to go somewhere else. We don't like what you're doing, and we're gonna go live somewhere else. So we went far away. We went to the east, and we traveled far, and we tried to find a place where we could live, and we found a herd of cattle-like creatures that they weren't like cattle today. They were a lot tougher, and they were bigger and tougher, and they're a bit dangerous. They weren't naturally aggressive, but they would be timid and run away. But if they decided to fight, they kill you. So there was some kind of cattle, but they weren't like cattle today. And we tried to use them as a food source. It didn't always. The way the food worked is, where possible, you would eat meat as much as you could, if possible. But you couldn't always eat meat all the time, and you'd have to have alternative food sources. So we're like, okay, this is rich meat source that we can get, and they tried to find ways to be able to use that herd as a food source. And sometimes the herd would split up, and we had to try to keep them herded together. So we had to constantly, the way we had to do it was we had to constantly push like a predatory pressure on them to make them come together. Because if there was when there was no more predatory threat against this herd, they would just disperse and wander away and do their own thing. But when there's some kind of pressure against them, it was just like what the people did, is they would herd together to protect themselves. So in order to keep them herded, we just had to scare them here and there, right? Unfortunately, when we tried to kill and eat like one of them, it would scare them off, and that would make them disperse. So we had to try and manage how to make them, to keep them herded without scaring them off. The same thing happens with fish, with schools of fish. When you're trying to, like maybe dolphins try to keep schools of fish together, and it's the same kind of scenario. So every now and then we'd fail. We're trying different techniques to learn how to try and keep them herded somewhere without dispersing them, and that would happen a few times. So we'd have to, whenever the herd moved, we had to move. And this went on for a while, and sad to say that when people who were too old or sick to move with us, sometimes we had to leave them behind. It's a long story in itself, and I have vivid memories of that. But everyone dies if everyone starves if we didn't move on. So we had to do what we had to do, and we would leave them there in the best way we could. Basically, leave people to die as comfortably as they could, and give them what we could to keep them going as long as they could. So we did this until we finally cornered them. It took us a long time and a long way, but we got this herd. We cornered them in an area where there were mountains and barriers that we had them basically trapped in a big open space where they wouldn't be able to disperse anywhere, and we could keep them in all herded up. And by then we'd really mastered how to try and take them out. And what we would do is okay, we'll take them out in the night, and we'll injure them in a certain way that they would quietly die overnight, and we'll try drag them away in the night, or if not in the night, in the daytime, in the morning, when we'd get all the others to go away from them, and then we drag the dead one out. So they wouldn't know that the herd wouldn't know that we'd taken it out, that we'd done this. As far as they're concerned, okay, someone's died during the night, and these scavengers are just going to eat it. So we'll just get away from this dead one. We'll just go over here. So we did. That's how we worked out. We tried to actually like take them down directly, and with injuries and stuff happened, and it's just impossible. So we eventually worked out that's how we have to do it. We have to do it during the night, quietly, and then we drag the body away. And these cattle type creatures, they were massive. They were a lot bigger than cows today, and a lot tougher. They were shaped differently. They were a lot more muscular, especially in the front end. Like their heads were like way bigger, and their shoulders and that. But that's what they were, and that's what we used as our primary meat food source. And it wasn't that we necessarily protect them. We also protected them as well, but we also had to use them as a food source to survive ourselves. We didn't just eat them as meat. We ate other things as well, but it was mainly that was our primary food source. So I'll stop here, and I'll go to I'll now go to the area recreation of that area. I've got so much work to do on doing this, and I'm probably never going to get it done, because I'm sick and I'm dying. I almost died again last night. I'm just trying the best I can, so I'll try the next part. I'll go to the next area, which is a recreation of the area that we ended up settling in after moving around a bit. It was the dimensions. I'll just get the dimensions up right now. It was somewhere. It was actually somewhere on the edge of Pakistan and India somewhere, I think. So let me find it. I don't know. Oh, where is it? I'll just cut the end of this and I'll find it. Hang on. Okay, I got it. So it looks like I've tried to track down the area where we end up settling, and it looks like it was somewhere around 26 degrees north, 63 degrees east. Somewhere around India and Pakistan, that area there. A lot happened on our journey to find a new home. We found a herd of cattle, and we tried to use them as the main food source, but they weren't like normal cattle. They were bigger and stronger. We had to learn how to take them down without scaring off the rest. When we scared them off, we had to follow them until they stopped again. One of our group was an old lady we had to leave behind in a small forest along the way. There was no other way. We would have all died of starvation if we stayed with her. We gave her what we could and left her to die. She was one of the most outspoken critics that led to us leaving in the first place. But she was now too frail to travel any further. I spent some time with her before we left, but she didn't have much to say. I think she knew this was coming for a while, and when the cattle moved on again, I think she was ready for what had to happen. I was deeply troubled by leaving her in the forest, and it drove me to be even more determined to protect the rest. Every time the cattle moved, we had to move with them and keep up with them. We learned from each mistake and tried different ways of taking them down without scaring them off. And then they took us to this place. the the grasslands with the mountains to the west, and we scared them off so much that they kept going through a landscape of long grasslands until they considered themselves they cornered themselves off with mountains on every side. In this place here, that you'll see soon, it was somewhere around the coordinates of 26 degrees north, 63 degrees east, around the edge of Pakistan and India. We came a long way from the forest in the west. We had the cattle penned in with nowhere to go. We learned to take them down overnight by jabbing a hole in their throat and carrying them off in the morning after they woke up. As far as they were concerned, one of them just died during the night. We would scare the others away while we took it apart so they wouldn't get spooked enough to stampede through a choke point we had them penned in by. So long as we kept making an appearance, it spooked them enough to keep them in a herd and stop wandering off. We had a permanent home and food source now. Toward the north was a rocky incline with a cliff at the end and a single large tree. I spent a lot of time there, alone, thinking and planning. Toward the west there were mountains where the sun set. They were a few days' walk away. We had scouts who were very fit and they would proudly claim they could get there in a single day. It took me at least 5. We used the mountains as a place of symbolic importance, for mourning a death or a precursor to what you could call today's marriage. There was a small freshwater lake inside the mountains. I taught many things on a regular basis from a stone circle of seats near the main camp. I tried to teach them the beginnings of civilization, written language, and the passing down of knowledge and moral concepts, but they always treated it like an entertainment of some sort. And despite turning up to every one of my speeches, they never acted on any of it and put it into practice. I tried to teach them like beginnings of written language and passing on information to in a continual line, stuff like that. Over time, the scouts came back very upset about what they had seen. The old home where the rest of our people lived, it was completely destroyed with every last one of them. I took the long journey back with a few others, and what I saw was a charred landscape full of burning embers. I don't know what it was, a volcano, a meteor, or maybe both. Whatever it was, it decimated everything. I was dedicated even more to protecting my special people. Our new home didn't last. A group of otherworldly giants, 2 to 3 times the height of a human, came and started taking away women. I eventually went to see their homes for myself. This is what's gonna, right now, I'll just play a little video of what it looked like going up to in these grasslands up in the hill, what these places look like. Get up there. Get up there. Fuck, I can jump high. To the horizon, identical copies of the same pyramid complex. They gave us trinkets to prevent us from fighting back, tools to take down and cut up the cattle, tools to change your hair that the women always fought over. It had some kind of like electrical effect that it seemed to electrify your hair and make it fuzz up in a ball and stuff like that, and the ability to straighten it out as well. I was against it from the start, this whole scenario of these extraterrestrials who had invaded our land, but everyone was too afraid of the giants and didn't want to piss them off. But they were taking more and more women, and everyone agreed something had to be done. But they were still too afraid to do anything. I stood up to them, stood in their way telling them to leave, but they would just look at me puzzled and walk away. They were so big they could stamp on top of a human easily. They appeared to have trouble in our air and gravity, and were always hot-footing it from one enclosure to another. Eventually I convinced one of them into debating me. He sat with me all day and brought a breathing apparatus connected to 2 cylinders to help him breathe at times while we debated. He became enraged at me in the end and stormed off. Later, 3 of them were upset and came to kill me. A ship appeared in the sky and fired several warning shots between me and them, scaring them off. The ship landed nearby, and I was greeted by a strange-looking person wearing colourful clothing with many frills hanging off it. He rescued me and took me aboard. He said he had been watching events going on for a long time, and decided to intervene at the last moment. He was convinced I was someone important, but due to being informed for so long, I gradually lost memories of who I once was. But I didn't forget my mission that I was on. Maybe he knew who I was, or maybe he just saw what I was trying to do. He wanted to take me far away and set me the task of being an ambassador of this world and a messenger. Nearby, one of the giants' homes had been set up. I decided to go there for myself. No one was brave enough to go close, and that was before I went up on the hill and saw a whole lot of them. So I did a full circle around this pyramid structure. This is how I was able to see that they had 4 pyramids, not 1, and with these entrance ways in them. But there's so much I could say. I did a full circle around it, noticing there were 4 pyramids linked together in an entranceway in each pyramid. I had not gone to the rocky area with the tree in about 2 years. A lot had changed. I decided to go there and see for myself what they were talking about, and that's when I saw to the horizon. These structures to the horizon. Okay, so the next part I'll just play the story, the version of the story I did with it was part of my main story. So put in context the things that I've shown and the areas and stuff. But first, that's what I'll do. What I'll do is I'll put a brief run through of the mobile fortress that I was in, where he took me to, and what happened in there. And then I'll play the original Alien story, so you'll understand and see 3D models of these places, and what happened there. This is a hangar reserved for galactic messengers and other non-civilian political actors who travel in a ship small enough to safely fit the clearance requirements defined by the port of entry. You can see the port of entry by turning around and walking along the hidden glass walkway in the bottom left corner that are constructed for the purpose of viewing it. This space is reserved for any extra machinery and space needed to work on your ship before it was allowed through into the hangar. This space had a few metal cabinets that were always empty and looked like they had been nuked and bathed in acid 1,000 times. This is what a typical ship looks like. There were different technology bases that were usually easy to tell apart, but there are also some overlapping technologies shared between them. Typically, circular ships like this belonged to a common technology base that was popular among civilians. But there are others, some of which were very different. My ship looked very different, like a bird with closed wings. Military ships were larger and typically looked like a tank. You can easily tell this technology base by the abundance of symmetrical circular structures. This hangar was usually empty or close to it. I only went into this area once, and that was my final moments of the universe I came from. It seems to be some kind of storage area related to galactic messengers and whoever else is docked at this hangar. If you notice in this area, there's two unusually larger doors that are made for more than just one person traveling, as though some kind of resources are being moved through them on both sides. And at the end, there's a small room, which the chamber was in. So this seems to be things are being moved through here and into that room to be used at the time. After the final goodbyes, I went into the chamber here in this room. The chamber disassembled me very painfully and very quickly, and then there was nothing. I experienced a long silence that felt like an eternity, and then suddenly out of nowhere, the strike of lightning, then nothing, then again, short time after the second was the third time. And then, after that, I slowly began waking up in the womb I was inserted into. And that womb being another universe from where I came from. And also a short distance back in time, before certain events came to pass, so that I could intervene and stop it from happening and change the timeline in a new universe.
Fatality.
In my story where I said my final goodbyes to the other universe, this is where it happened. This is the entrance to the political area. It was always full of dark hallways that are in a big maze. Maybe your eyes needed to adjust over time, but I found it very difficult to travel. And I was not allowed in, no one was allowed in there. I was only in there twice, as a very rare exception. If you look at the front, there's a podium, and I've never got to see anyone use it, but I can only guess that every now and then one of the politicals needed to come out and make an announcement to one or several new arrivals. I just never got to see it being used. But that's what it seemed to have a purpose for. Take a look yourself and make up your own mind. This is the exact location the matriarch took me to when she confessed a lot of secrets about the governing authority, the universe, and about sending me back. You can see, if you turn around, there's a green table. I have no idea what it does, but it looks like some kind of hologram projection thing or something. There were computers and lights everywhere, but it was very dark. It was lit up a little bit better than the hallways because of the lights, but I couldn't really make much out. It was very dark. In the corner I noticed a computer section with a screen on it that looked like it was in the shape of a hot water system. The rest of the computers were pretty much box shaped. First went into the political area with the green alien lady who was a member of my 6-member team. We were taken by a guide, one of the politicals, after talking to them, and they took us into this area, this computer area. It was some kind of important computer room. At the back of the room there was a very important computer that seemed central to the whole room, and it affected a lot of other places as well. And they were very, let's say, scared of anyone going near it. They didn't want anyone near it at all. It was very important. It was very sensitive computer equipment. And we spoke to them. The one at the computer at the back was the one in charge, and she had to do some kind of thing with the computer first, and then we spoke, and she said that we're not supposed to be here, but she understands the situation and the urgency, and she would take us back out, and we would organise to speak to the matriarch herself.
Fatality. Fatality.
In my story where I said my final goodbyes to the other universe, this is where it happened. This area leads to the offices. This is a very important area because messengers who travel across space will return in decades, perhaps hundreds of years, so their offices and whatever important things in their office that needs to be kept. This is my office. I had this office for thousands of years. I didn't live for thousands of years. I lived across thousands of years, and as a messenger and a traveller, I spent most of that time in a cold sleep, frozen, while I travelled. I stored items here of importance, not that many, but of importance, as you see on the table there. Most important was a wooden tote that ancient humans gave to me under very friendly terms, so that I would never forget them. Over time, that wood kind of rotted away, and I came back one time and it was gone, and they told me that they had to take it. It had become potential hazard, and they destroyed it. Before it was destroyed, I had already organised to have a metal copy of it made, which is the far right totem you see on the table there. There was another stone totem that was made for me by ancient humans later on. It wasn't as important as the wooden one though, and I was very upset about losing that, about returning and losing that wooden totem. But at least I had a metal mold of it that would last. I don't have that anymore either. These storage containers were used for storing any tools or resources needed then and there to work on ships. Working on ships usually involved going to the next hangar, hangar 3, or if it's even a hangar, that's where they will be taken. The storage containers here were for anything that needed to be done here and now, but once or twice they were moved. This is a storage bay for heavy machinery, cranes and the like, that are used for moving the ships into Hangar 3, where they are to be worked on and whatever else needs to be done to them. This was a type of hangar, a little bit different to the first two. This is where the ships were taken to get worked on. There was a lot more machinery there, a lot more cranes and all that kind of thing. Well, you got a gun, now's the time to use it. Blow up the red wall with your gun, and if that's not good enough, go get the boxes a bit further back and shoot them at the wall. You only get to shoot it once, so the boxes to try and push a hole into it.
This will be the introduction. Proceed to continue. Fatality.
This is a representation of the buildings that the meddlers lived in from 13,000 years ago. 13,000 years ago, a group of extraterrestrial aliens came to this world and they started kidnapping women, and they said that they were creating children with them, but it wasn't until thousands of years later that I ever got to see any of these children, and it was all secretive at first, and they were like 2 to 3 times the height of a human, and they would easily destroy a human. One of them could, there's no amount of humans that could beat one of them. They would thrash them. So humans were scared of these creatures, and they didn't dare challenge them. And in order to make sure that mankind, and by mankind I'm talking about a specific branch of mankind, in order to make these humans behave themselves and not resist, they were given trinkets and information and things that would pacify them and just make them behave. Little rewards, you might say. Even some limited degree of housing as well. When I saw these buildings at first, I did a full circle around them and to make out what I could. I challenged them, and there's a long story there, but there was one point in my story where the first few of them that I was aware of, I heard that there was a massive colony of them further away, and I went up a hill to see them, to see all of them from a bit higher elevation, and I did so. I traveled all the way there and I did so, and what I could see was the same copy of the same exact building, just as the couple that I'd seen previously, only this weren't one or two of them. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of them, all the way to the horizon, of the same exact building, made of the same plain white ceramic looking material, all with the same circular fence around them, all the way to the horizon. I don't know how many of them there were. I don't know if they were scattered around the world in other areas. I can just speak for the area that this happened in, and the area that it happened in was somewhere around the eastern part of Iran, maybe even toward the edge of Pakistan, near between the Middle East and India. And where there's if you look at a world map and there's a straight area between the Middle East and India, if you pretty much around like central to that straight area, if you were just to go down and go inland a bit, that's where it was. It wasn't on the horizon. I'm sorry, it wasn't on the coastline. It was inland a bit, and it was mostly full of grasslands that would pretty much generally flat land. But in the horizon of the main area, there was to the west there was some mountains, and there was water in the mountains, which was where people would go to do important things. There's a lot I could say. I just thought I'd mention that. This is like in a secret area of the game that I put up, so. This is the main hub area for the game. I'm going to work on this more later. This is just a filler and testing area. There's nothing important to the story and the game, or whatever you want to call it. It's just kind of for testing and stuff. So there's probably a few cool things here if you want to play around with some testing stuff. If the game crashes, just Alt F4 and reset it. Just restart again.
Fatality. 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 Fatality.
This is a separate event that happened after my main story. When I came to this universe and I was implanted into a fetus, the life I've lived here, things have happened. And this is one of those things that happened. At 7 PM, I shaved, got ready for dinner, and I went out to have dinner. I returned home, went to sleep. Then I woke up in a strange place, this place. But I didn't wake up the normal way. I was fixated on a trance in a drawing that looked like it was made by a toddler of a tree, the sky, the grass, a wooden table. Really plain looking image that I was fixed on in a trance. I managed to break out of the trance and came to realize this is where I was, in a very dark place. It's important to note that at 7 PM when I shaved, I was talking to friends online who saw what I looked like. They saw that I had just shaved, I was clean shaven. This is going to be important later to confirm what happened. After I realized where I was in this dark place, I dared not even look around me. I looked a little bit to the sides and then I noticed a door to the left in the dark. I thought it was the best choice of action to just quickly get out of there. So I walked toward the door. It was so dark that I couldn't tell what was in the room. I knew there were a few things in the room, and I was concerned that there are other people like me who were in some kind of trance. But I couldn't see in the dark, and I just quickly got out of there. In this room, I noticed a familiar green table, but I don't think it was the same table. But it seemed to be a similar design, but it wasn't the same table. This was bigger than the one that I know, and it didn't look exactly the same, but it seemed to be very and suspiciously similar. I quickly went to the next room after seeing it. In this room, I noticed some white, silverish, metallic looking gas bottles or something like that, and some planks of some sort all messily piled up around the corner of the room. The rest of the room was empty except for this bundle of two different types of items that seemed to be just randomly scattered all around the corner. Some of them were upright, others were just down like they'd just been dumped there. I briefly looked at them and I continued to the next door. In this room, there was a long curved hallway with windows all along the edge of it. I looked out of those windows as I went along, and I started with the second window and I glanced as I was going through, confused at what I was seeing. It looked like whatever this place was, that it was moving through space toward the direction that I was heading. But this wasn't normal space. It was shaped like a cylinder, and it had a defined edge, and that edge was distorted with a glowing, twisted mesh of shapes that looked like a distorted, twisted image of looking at something that you would normally look at from space, like looking at a planet or a star system and sun, something with light on it, but it was all distorted and twisted, and it was just frozen there, and there were blobs of this on the edges of this cylinder as it was traveling through it, like they were just frozen there. This is where the story really begins, and there's a lot I could say that happened here. I'm just going to abbreviate this for now. I've got it written in a lot of detail elsewhere. As I walked toward this light, about half a dozen little grey type of creatures just started casually walking down the stairs, full of energy, just acting like children really. and jumping around and stuff like that. And then they saw me and stopped, and they were surprised, but they weren't scared. They're just surprised. And I heard their voices in my head say clearly, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." I tried to speak back to them in the same way through thought, and they were able to understand me. And I had a conversation with them, and as it turns out, they can speak verbally just like me, but they were using devices that are scattered around this place that allowed them to speak directly in thought, which was more efficient. We had a normal civil conversation about why I was there, what they were doing and stuff, and what they told me I became very upset about. I was saying that they were from the distant future. Who knows if they were even telling me the truth, but they said that they were from the distant future at a time where there were wars that happened in among those who were left in the universe in the distant future. And most of those who lived on after the wars, they segregated, and there was technology at the time where they were able to weave their own universe out of the mesh of this universe, and they'd be in their own enclosed bubble universe, completely separated from everything else, and they had more control over this than the normal universe, whatever that meant. And they were able to, with great difficulty, create some kind of portal where they were able to enter our universe and exit it, and they were harvesting resources from our universe that we would otherwise not have missed, stuff that we didn't use, didn't need, didn't notice, that we wouldn't notice that it would be gone. And that include harvesting biological material, which will happen in the next section. I had a discussion with them for quite a while about this, and I started getting upset, and I said that I'm not going to let them do this, and someone or something must have snuck up behind me and hit me over the head with the back of the head with something, and I had like a second of extreme nausea as I collapsed to the ground and passed out. Whoever or whatever hit me over the head, they couldn't have, I don't think they could have come from the left and the right, because I would have seen them out of the side of my eye. They had to have come from behind, wherever I came from. And that direction led to a room at the end, which I started at. So maybe there was someone in that room, maybe like me, who was maybe under their control to hit me over the head or something. I don't know, but someone seemed to come from behind and hit me out really hard at the back of the head with something. So I passed out, and I woke up in the next section ahead. In the light ahead of you, just walk straight through the light, and you'll go through into the next section. I woke up again from another trance while I was in this room, sitting on this chair, and they had this helmet semicircle over my head, and they also had a needle that was going through it and into my head, that they were searching my brain for something. And I had another discussion with them for a while, but I didn't try to fight back because I wasn't in a position to, and it probably would have had bad consequences since they had a needle in my head and stuff like that. So I had a conversation with them, and they explained that they were searching for a certain kind of brain chemical or something, that two of them that were very rare, that we produced earlier on in our evolution, but that we don't use anymore, and they have a use for it, and that if they harvest it, it won't affect us in any way, that we wouldn't notice. But who knows if they were even telling the truth. But they were harvesting this, and who knows what else, but this was what they were harvesting from me, and I was supposedly one of their richest sources of this stuff. After talking to them for a while, they put me back unconscious, and I woke up in my bed, in the wrong way around, upside down, back to front, in a really awkward angle. I got up after what just happened, and I almost passed out. I had extreme nausea, pain. I felt injured all over, like I was like poisoned and beaten up like a with a meat tenderizer, and as soon as I stepped on my foot, I massive pain in my foot. I couldn't walk on it. I limped all the way to my computer and told my friends who I'd just spoken to hours beforehand what just happened, as unbelievable as it sounds. And then I noticed I have a beard. So wherever I was, I had just shaved before going to sleep. I only went to sleep for I've only been asleep for a couple of hours, and I felt like I'd been asleep for a week. And I woke up, and now I've got a beard. So clearly I've been somewhere. So I took photos of my beard, and my 3 witnesses who saw me a few hours beforehand, I was clean shaven, and here I am showing them, hey, look, I've got a beard now. I've been somewhere, and they were my witnesses to show that I grew a beard in a couple of hours. I was definitely taken somewhere, and something happened, and who knows if my memories of what happened were even accurate or tampered with. Who knows if they were even telling the truth. But this is what I recall, and I was very sick when I came to, and it took a while to pass, but it all passed, and I had a minor problem. My skin went a bit funny for a little while, but it got better. My foot, however, I had this I took photos of this over several months because it got worse. I had some kind of injection site in the bottom of my foot, on an awkward place where I put pressure on, so it hurt to walk on. I had to walk on the front of my foot. I seemed to have been injected through the bottom of my foot with some kind of long needle, and it's gone through my foot and up through into the bone of my leg. And it was very painful, and it got more sore and visually worse over several months. I couldn't walk on it for months, and it blistered up like some kind of burn. And it took quite a number of months to recover from. I couldn't walk on it for that long. So I have 3 witnesses of me growing a beard, and who have seen the photos of my foot and the progression of it, how it blistered up and all that. So who knows, whether my memories are accurate, they've been tampered with, or whether they were being honest with me about what happens. But according to them, they were from the distant future, and they were entering different places and times in our universe in order to secretly harvest materials without interfering with the timelines. They were harvesting resources that we wouldn't miss, and they were trying to do it in such a way as though that they wouldn't interfere with anything. So yeah, obviously the fact that I have a memory of this is proof of interference. So they didn't seem to take this very seriously. So there's a case one could make to say that they're either being negligent or dishonest, or whatever the case may be. But it just doesn't sound good, whatever is going on. Now, considering my injuries and the strange things that had happened to me, it seems clear that there must have been another altercation, for lack of a better word, and something went down, and I was injured in some way, and something happened, and I was like very sick and like almost dying. I was in that bad of a way. So something had happened, and they done something to me and dumped me back. And the way I was dumped back, it was like I was dumped back really awkwardly and in a hurry. So something definitely went down. And maybe some people got hurt or something, I don't know. But I certainly got hurt in the process. This is the elevator out of this area. To go to any other area, it's impossible to orient yourself and know exactly where you're going. All I can say is that it takes time to get to your destination, and it's not easy. Motion sickness is a big thing, and I got it a lot. It got better over time, but others have chronic problems with it. So going into a new area, it's a bit of a trip. It's not something that you do lightly. You're going somewhere, you need to be sure, because you've got a long trip ahead of you and you might get sick. This is a security checkpoint for entry into secure public areas. Most of what is done here is to identify, log, and scan you for any potential problems, such as an imminent health problem or carrying items that aren't allowed, such as personal weapons. But most importantly, give you any important information, guidance, directions, or advice on any relevant situation going on within. Sometimes there are situations going on that affect someone in a certain way. Things happen, things that are incompatible or whatever, they happen, so sometimes a warning or avoid this or you need to do that or something.
Fatality.
As you can see, there are tables on both sides of the fence. There's a reason why. Sometimes people going through the checkpoint area, there are problems and they can't get through and it takes time to resolve some things. So they would sit at these two tables here, waiting, and they would sometimes either in casual conversation or for security reasons as they're trying to get through to give information as they need, additional information. They can both sit at this table at opposite sides of the fence. Sometimes it takes a while, it can take several hours. Perhaps even days, which pretty much be several hours.
Fatality. Fatality.
This here is the scanner that they put you through, but they don't always use it, so they already know who you are and you've recently been scanned and you're going in and out. They won't rescan you. This is if you haven't been there for a while, they'll rescan you. There is a little waiting room. Not sure why, but there's a little waiting room at the end of the checkpoint in the entryway to the public area. And it has like a comfortable lounge on each side of the room, shaped in a strange way. The only way to get in through this door into the public area is for someone from the checkpoint area to take you through all these doors. So if you were to come from outside back in, you need to get someone from the checkpoint area to let you back out. Actually happened to me once. It wasn't a big deal, but I knew it often. I chose to sit on those seats to sit down and wait for someone. This is the main public staging area. These areas, there's a lot of them, and you would be grouped in with other extraterrestrial species. Based on various criteria, like you're near each other, you're similar to each other, whatever. This is important, especially for new arrivals who have never met other species before, because a lot of them get very spooked, especially those that are timid, and it can be a big problem. So this is like an introduction area, and acclimatizing yourself to meeting other species, and there's all the whole area is based on this. So this is like the first public area, and once you anything you need from this area, there's a lot of things in this area. Once you're ready to go and do bigger things, you go to the actual full-on areas. So this is like a staging beginning area. I have no idea where this door goes. I can only guess that maybe it's either something to do with the checkpoint people or more likely the local stores and stuff in the area. Maybe it was some kind of storage area for their stock and stuff like that. I don't know. It's just a guess, but I have no real idea where this goes. This is the first store in the staging area. It was a type of cafe where you could try out food from different alien cultures. Of course, if you actually ate what they ate, it would probably kill you. So in order to serve you anything, they had to know your species and personal physiology to determine what options they can offer you. In most cases, they would offer a substitute similar to the original, but they would try to make as much of it as authentic as they could. Sometimes that included some kind of neutralizing ingredient that bonds to the atoms so that you can't digest it. Most people had nutrient organ implants and didn't need to eat the normal way. For those who didn't, they would eat a tailor-made pill every day. I took a large blue pill every day. These cafes weren't meant for normal meals. They were for learning about other cultures and experiencing it by eating their food.
Fatality. Fatality.
There are a series of stores in this area, mostly like for education, information, a few souvenirs. Most of the time they didn't sell anything, it was all free. Sometimes they had souvenirs that they would give to whoever would turn up, at least give you one each. But it depends on the scarcity of the resource, and things can sometimes be free and then sometimes there's some kind of exchange of some currency involved. But typically, for the most part, they would offer you like one thing for free, and a lot of information and all kinds of tutorials, all kinds of things they could do. And so sometimes they give you something as well. If you really wanted, they will give you something as well.
Fatality. Fatality. Fatality.
This is the central area of the staging area. It's very important because if you're spooked by other species, as many are, not all but many are, you need a place where you can adjust and adapt and get used to meeting others. And this is what this area is for. So if you look around, you'll see walls everywhere, privacy walls everywhere. This is part of, you know, if you are petrified at the sight of a certain species, as many are, you can get out of their sight and you get them out of your sight and you go somewhere a little bit more secure and private, but without having full privacy. You can't just shield yourself in a corner. It's designed like this on purpose to acclimatize you to other species. And there was one particular time where I had to spend time with one of them from a group. It's a long story, I won't mention it here. I'll explain it later in the actual narrative. This is a big lookout area. There was a big open space in front of this, and far away there were other structures and buildings and stuff like that, but there was this big chasm in between, a big empty space, and this was like at the edge of it.
Fatality.
This is where everything really opens up. So you're now past the staging area where everyone meets everyone. So So this is a big open area, whereas it's the main hub for all kinds of places, which you'll see further down the road. Here there are two choices. You go down the stairs here, you go back to pretty much the staging area, but for the species that are designated to this staging area, you have your own residencies where you sleep in a really rest area, medical and stuff like that, things that are relating to your group and your group of species delegated to this area. So it's all these resources dedicated to your evening. If you go down the road to the right, that's where you go to the open area, the hub where it connects to all different areas. So left goes to your basically your personal stuff, right goes to everything else.
Fatality.
This is the main medical area for the group of species delegated to this area. There are other medical facilities dedicated to other groups all over the place as well, each their own. It's not just one species, but a group of species based on various criteria. There are other areas as well that kind of loosely relate to medical stuff, but this is for actual medical stuff. If you're sick or you need help with something, you need any kind of medical treatment or something, whatever you want to call it for something, this is where you go. Any medical problems. This area is for the medical staff. Now, obviously I had no reason to go in here, so I never did. Not that I would have been allowed to anyway. Residencies, basically your sleeping quarters. There was no luxurious massive Star Trek quarters in this. No, it was, you get a very tiny compressed room with a tiny bed on it, and it's just for sleeping. That's it, empty room with empty tiny room with a bed in it. Now, I was asked one time, someone said, like, don't you want somewhere bigger? And I was like, this is all I'm only in this room to sleep. I've got things to do outside when I'm sleeping. I don't care where I am. So there were better places than what I was given. I never saw any, but I was first given a tiny room with a really basic bed in it. I don't know what any other quarters look like, because I never went into any of them. But that's what I was given, and I was offered something better. These are elevators that lead to specific personalized areas, like, for example, toilets. And that is a long, complicated topic in itself. That will be explained elsewhere. But these elevators, they go to certain timely resource places. This path leads to all kinds of other civilian areas on a broader scale. This is a reception stall that would do what you'd expect it to do. Just ask the questions you need to find your way, or any information you need to know about the place or whatever. This is what it's for. Just some basic guidance and stuff.
Fatality. Fatality.
This is an information board, or a series of them. It contains information on pretty much like if you go to like an airport or a train station or something, you get big boards of all this information. It's kind of like that, only it's not just for like traveling and locations and stuff. There's all kinds of information on this regarding the entire mobile fortress. And there's other areas just like this. It helps you navigate and it gives you information that you might need to know. As you can see, it's in a main area before you move on to wherever location, so it contains that information you need. It might sound strange to have a biological area, but because of hazards and all kinds of other problems, it's separated in a completely different section than everything else. So this is a very complicated and networked area. So there's all kinds of areas that are free to move around in, and there's all kinds of quarantine zones, and there be security or places you're just not allowed at all, at least for a time, and it kind of changes as time goes on. And different, you'd be cleared to go in one area but not another because of potential hazards combining with other hazards. It's a big complicated maze and a mess, but there's a lot of security involved in this area because of hazards. And you go, if you went in here, you'd be free to go here, there, and then not free to go here or there, and then that could change. You go again tomorrow, and it'd be different depending on what's going on.
Fatality.
This area is where real work is done, so it's the more important stuff. The main reason why people travel hundreds of years each way in what
Fatality.
the planet or wherever you're from. By the time you get to your destination, everyone's long dead. By the time you get back, your world might not even exist anymore. Who knows what you return to? So if you go to the mobile fortress, hell, if you travel anywhere, you need to be doing so for very serious reasons. You're leaving everything behind. So typically people come here to do some kind of work, which will inevitably, in hundreds of years or whatever, end up benefiting their own world, or at least sharing information with the rest of the galaxy, and exposing your ideas and testing them. And this also involves debating platforms and stuff. That's a long story, but this is where a lot of the important work, that the main reason that people usually come here for. Not necessarily always, but in most cases people come here for some kind of important work to do. And this is a very large area connected to all other network areas and stuff too, in a big network. This is the main administrator area of this whole section of the mobile fortress. There are many such sections in there. They're usually, depending on what kind of security they are, they can be separated by checkpoints, and there can be other checkpoints in sensitive areas and stuff like that. Things are divided into sections, and this is the main administrator area for this entire section that you see here. This is a research area for mainly this section of the mobile fortress, but there's other information here that you can get in other research centers, but this is more focused of information that relates to the local area. So the species that are involved here, like, think of this, you have species that are really far away, and any information you have is going to be thousands, tens of thousands of years out of date. So this is more updated local information. The closer the information is to home, the more valid it is, typically. So there's kind of like a general base stock of information that you can get of any of these research centers. And there's also
each has their own additional information with piles and piles of information. And this is different than the main staging area in the fact that this people don't typically serve you in here. This is like a library kind of thing, where you can go through its information yourself. This is for people who have already know what they're doing. This is a research area for mainly this section of the mobile fortress, but there's other information here that you can get in other research centers. But this is more focused information that relates to the local area. So the species that are probably like, think of this, you have species that are really far away, and any information you have is going to be thousands, tens of thousands of years out of date. So this is more updated local information. The closer the information is to home, the more valid it is, typically. So there's kind of like a general base stock of information that you can get of any of these research centers. There's also, each has their additional information with piles and piles of information. And this is different than the main staging area in the fact that people don't typically serve you in here. This is like a library kind of thing, where you can go through its information yourself. This is for people who have already know what they're doing.